What's up, everybody? This is your host, Rev Andre Am, Pastor Andre Mitchell, Dr. Dre, whatever you want to call me. My co-host, none other than incomparable Stephen Mitchell, and this
What's up,
is
everybody?
this is the PopUp podcast. And so we are popping up, and hopefully you pop in with us. And would you share it? Let somebody know that we're on. And I see we've got a few people on with us, and we appreciate you
Thank y'all for
stopping
hopping on
in.
with us right away.
We may not do Instagram. We might just stay with the Facebook group today. But uh, Steve, you want to just kick us off again and see how we want to roll for today?
De- yeah, definitely. I want to tell Instagram here that we are on Facebook. So again, thanks everybody for popping in on us with the Pop Up Pack podcast. We've kind of caught a nice little cadence of every couple weeks sitting down together and talking. Last 2 weeks, we really talked about grief. Um, and, it was important for us to really dissect a lot of different areas of grief. I think, we first just dealt with, you know, unexpected loss, things that are happening in our personal lives, kind of the city where we're from. And then we were, kind of dialoguing and then how to, you know, grieve well or good grief and kind of, grieving over things that you probably don't think to grieve over, but helping you understand that the proper response to loss is grief is was kind of key last week. And so kind of thinking about hopping back into that tonight. Hop into the comments, let us know what you think. But I guess one way for us to kick it off is, we understand grief happens. We understand that we need to grieve well. So what's kind of our final words on grief? How do we, trying to put it in the form of a question, what's something we need to make sure we do um, as it relates to how we grieve? Maybe you can answer that.
Yeah, I'll start off with something maybe that's helpful. Grief comes with a lot of emotions. And so when you think about emotions, the key root word in the word emotions is the word motion or movement. And it's ironic that grief brings a lot of emotions, but also the downside of grief, it tries to cause you to be trapped or stuck. But if you grieve properly, you actually move through it. The emotions allow you to move. The emotions don't stay the same. You are able to journey through grief. So, one of my final words on it is grief is proper, grief is right. But if you get stuck in grief, that's when the trouble comes, when you are not progressing through it and it's robbing you of who you are as a person, as an individual, and you don't have any movement in it. So I think that's the scary part about grief. And one thing that's interesting is since we were last talking, there's been a lot more death in the city, a lot of unexpected death, a lot of young people dying, people that dying before their time, overdoses, some of the weird, tragic type of death that make you just think that life is important. And so that's another thing when you're traveling through grief, you have to learn how important life is because if you get stuck in grief, then you feel like you should be the next person to go.
Don't get
But
stuck. Um, when we think about it, something just popped in my head around how do we uh, how do we not get stuck, but also properly revisit it? Like, because if you're grieving in that moment, like it's the proper response, and it's easier with some things because with a job you have to move on. But in how we normally think about grief with the loss of a life or the loss of a loved one, you end up revisiting it. So how do you revisit that type of grief in a healthy way and not get stuck there?
Yeah. What's up, Stephanie? I see Stephanie on here. I think one thing I've learned when it comes to the death of loved ones, that the pain shifts the memories, and there's always going to be some pain there because it's a loss. You're grieving a loss, but there are memories that mean something to you. That the tears probably still come, the pain comes, but then there's the smiles come as well. It's like, oh, I remember when she did this, or you see a picture that puts you in a place that you're able to smile about without breaking down and going through that whole process again. So when you say getting stuck in grief, that grief can trigger you. And if you haven't progressed through the levels of grief, I guess that's a better way to say it, the levels of grief. If you don't progress properly, then every time you're triggered, you start back at the ground floor. You start back at the same point you were when you found out that they died. But when you progress through grief, you don't have the exact same pain. It's pain, but it's not as intense. It's not the same because you've learned how to navigate the memories. You learn how to navigate moving forward. You learn how to navigate the legacy of that person. So I don't necessarily think you have to revisit grief because it will always visit you. The loss will always visit you in some way.
Mm.
A song, a smell. Like talking about our grandmother, certain smells just remind me of her. But then I can also think about the positivity in that smell. Like, oh, I miss her, but man, she was a classy lady. She had some nice fragrances. I don't always have to think of God, why is she gone? There's ways to think about it. Now, it depends on how the grief came, because when people leave tragically or suddenly and you don't get a chance to prepare for it, process it, then that it takes a while to process and get through those levels, because every little thing can kind of trigger you. Uh, let's say you lost someone through a drunk driver accident. Every time the news comes on and there's a drunk driver, that can always trigger you. So I'm not saying that it's easy, but I think grief has levels, and on each level you're going to be visited by the loss, but it shouldn't put you back at square one.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. I was just googling while you were talking about that, and it looks like the five stages of grief are: one, denial or shock. That's the first thing that happens. You go into denial, which that makes sense to me. After denial is anger. Now I'm upset that it happened. Then after I'm upset and angry, then I'm into depression. That's the third stage. And then the fourth stage is bargaining. I'm not sure what they mean by bargaining. I have some thoughts on it. The last stage is acceptance. That's the fifth stage. But I think there may be a stage they're missing, and I would say would be aspiration. Because when I get triggered, I love what you said there, that you don't even have to necessarily revisit it because it'll always revisit you. And that is certainly the truth. Um, but the reason I say after acceptance is aspiration is because I think, like, when I think of my grandmother, when I think of my cousin that we lost, or even uh, a friend that we lost in college, Morgan, uh, I'm always, I always aspire to do what I wanted to do for them or with them or in their honor. And when I think back to my cousin Michael, when I think back to Morgan, or even when I think about my grandmother, I think about how can I live in such a way that would honor them, but would also celebrate and almost memorialize them. Like, for instance, with Morgan, Morgan was a fantastic singer, and I would like to. It's still something I aspire to, is to start a fund in her name, and like scholarship or offer scholarships to people aspiring musically or in the arts, um, and also to do a movie in her honor, just to memorialize her. So I aspire to do that, and it kind of drives me or pushes me to want to do more. So I think these stages of grief are huge. Denial, it's true. Anger, depression, bargaining. Not sure what they mean exactly by that, but then acceptance. But then I think if I had to add a sixth stage of grief, and probably the that revisiting stage, that recycling stage in a healthy way. To your point, not getting stuck in the anger, not getting stuck in the past, but rather saying, "Wow, okay, I accept they're gone, and now I aspire to honor them with my life that I still have here."
Yeah, I like that. Now, it's something interesting. I was talking to someone this week, and they say that psychologists and psychiatrists are starting to say they used to believe that those stages went in order, that those stages actually progressed that way. But people are thinking now that those stages can come out of order.
Mm,
You may think you've accepted it because sometimes you have a person in the family who's like the strong person, the leader. So a lot of times they have to do all of the planning. They have to visit the funeral home. They have to be the person. So they feel like they've accepted it. But as the funeral is gone months later, then sometimes the denial kicks in and they start going through the stages that they didn't go before. Because as a pastor, I've seen people at the funeral just look really strong and like really on point, and you wonder how they have that strength. Then a year later, I may get a call from that same person, and they are totally a wreck. Like it comes, grief comes in waves, comes in stages, but it doesn't always come in a certain order. But
mm.
I like that aspiration because for me, I'm always trying to think about legacy. I'm always trying to think, what can I do to honor that person, and trying to step in that. But you can't get to aspiration if there isn't some sort of acceptance to it. And so, yeah, I think that's important. Now the bargaining. This is something I didn't prepare, so I'm just throwing this off the top of my head. But I know sometimes in the bargaining, it's almost I wish it was me. Some people have that feeling, man. I wish it was me who died. I wish I didn't. They didn't have to go, and it was me. And sometimes it's bargaining there, and sometimes you're bargaining with God in the sense that, okay, since you took my loved one, I'm only going to do X, Y, Z. I'm not going to fully go whatever. I'm not for sure exactly what they mean by bargaining, but for me, I know there's a lot of conversations you have with God that seems to be like a bargaining thing. But if you can get to the aspiration, a lot of times God can use that loss to push you forward. And one thing I did want to ask, I don't know if you're prepared to do this or not, but are you prepared to even talk about what happened with Morgan, or like the
Yeah,
situation surrounding it?
yeah. I mean, I can talk about it now, and it's probably because it was such a long time ago. But in 2007, we were out on spring break. One of the key thoughts in my mind was, all of my, I'll just say it, white friends seem to be having like these grandiose breaks. I'm in almost my junior year at that point. I'm like, man, I haven't really had a real spring break. So me and three of my buddies, we all hop in my car and drive to Florida. No where to stay, nothing. Real college craziness. Just we just gonna go and figure it out, and we did. We figured it out. We met some people and we stayed with them, and we were having heck of a time. And I don't know if it got back to campus that we had kind of been out there. There were other students that we knew in the same city, but eventually the people we were staying with had left. They were from Alabama, and they were done with their spring break. They had left early, and we were like, maybe it was a Thursday night or maybe a Friday, and we were like, well, we still got the whole weekend. We don't want to go back early at all. And so, lo and behold, Morgan, uh, and her friend from Detroit, and another girl we knew from school drove down. And just happened to be driving down the day where we were shacking up at. It kind of ended, and so it was like serendipity in that way. And man, it was just crazy because it was such a fun day. We were doing college kid type of stuff, hanging out. They got a hotel, so we were kind of crashing with them now, and then we went out. And what was funny is that we were leaving early. We were like, oh, we're not going to really party too hard. So we felt like we were being, at least I felt like we were being responsible. We had already been wild most of the week. It was like, this night we'll be responsible. We have our, friends here, like sisters here from school. And so we leaving the little club hangout early. And I won't go into all the details, but long story short, a drunk driver hit us uh, as we were basically pulling out of the parking area. It wasn't really a lot. It was kind of just a long street in Panama City. If you've been to Panama City, Florida, you probably know what I'm talking about. It's kind of a strip, and apparently it's known for those type of accidents. But hit by a drunk driver, and just like in a flash, life changed. Grief, denial, everything happened to everyone's point in the chat. It definitely didn't happen linear, happened all at once. And if I think about it too deep, I could tear up now because I won't go into all the details, but I still feel guilt. And I forget where we're at with the stages, not just denial, anger, depression, but it's probably somewhere in that anger, depression stage that I can get into if I think about this too long. Because, and I'll just be transparent, Morgan was in the passenger seat of the car that got hit first. And I came to out of my car, I crossed the street and I came over to look at her, and it was like I almost froze and didn't know what to do. And I felt like I still have the images in my mind, and I can't go too far into it, but basically I felt guilty that I didn't do more to like save her in that moment. Pull her out of the car, try to I don't even know what the autopsy was exactly, but I definitely get stuck in that spot. And but when I go past that and I get unstuck, I do think about, wow, she was just a great person. She was a star. We even have some video footage still. I think one of my buddies has it of that night. And she was singing. She was a songbird, like amazingly gifted in that area. And I just think, man, I really want to honor her. And I aspire to. And that's one way I deal with the grief, is like, that's one way I could feel better about that thing I struggle with there.
Yeah, that's 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 tough, and just even hearing you recount it, and I remember, I've always, our age difference is, so I won't say exactly what it is, but I've always been a little bit, even though we're brothers, a little bit as a mentor in your life, and so I remember talking you through some of those things, and it reminds me of one of the things to aspire to is not just on the outset of grief, is before grief ever comes. You have to aspire to have certain relationships where you can unload, where you can have raw emotions, and you have people who will sit with you whatever you're going through. And sometimes people want that they pick the wrong people. You need somebody who's empathetic, not just sympathetic, but who's empathetic enough to feel what you feel in that moment. Just like while you were talking, I pulled myself off camera for a second, because for that moment, I felt like I was there in Panama City with you, hearing you tell the story, because I have that mindset of crawling into someone's life and walking with them where they are. And so I'll speak on it from two aspects. One, you want to aspire to have those people in your life ahead of time. Know your real friends, those real people that you can go to. but also the aspiration, because I have suffered loss, I want to be there for people like some people were there for me. So I do try to process things in a way, and it's a song that Elevation Worship sang years ago with Israel Houghton. It says, "Nothing is wasted." I like that idea that even though this is a loss, that it doesn't have to be wasted, that it could mean something. And I'll just tell a story of grief for me that I always remember, and that is just my cousin who passed away at the age of 40. And him and I were really close. So I was the oldest son of my brothers. And so I didn't have an older brother to look up to, but my cousin, who was 3 years older than me, he was like my older brother. But he was a part of the reason why I got on at the General Motors, the job that I got on at. So we spent a lot of time together, and I end up getting the opportunity to lead him to the Lord. For just to make a long story short, I led him to the Lord by sending him a daily scripture. And it was something he asked me for. He was like, we always talked about God, but I never was real pushy. And he was like, well, I don't know. I'm thinking about, like, I don't know what it means to be saved, blah, 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 but how about you just send me a scripture every day? So I did that for a moment of almost 3 to 6 months, somewhere in between there. And he ended up giving his life to the Lord. And then later on, we would keep that up. I would send him a scripture and explain it if he didn't understand it. And I'm doing all this through text. Well, I get one response back from him that says, you know what, cuz, he always called me cuzzo. You know what, cuzzo, I'm ready to take that next step with God. And that was his conversation after our text thread in the morning. By the next morning, he was gone. He died that same day. So for the longest, I kept that text in my phone, and I would just look at it, and it said, I'm ready to take the next step with God, or my next step with God, and he's gone. And I'm just like, I didn't expect it. I thought that we were going to be doing ministry together, and because he was such a smart guy in the union, and we talked about all the ministry that we would do together. But on the other side, when I think of the legacy, and I think of aspiration, I think of the fact that, yeah, it hurts, but by the same token, he made that comment he made to me is that I'm going to take that next step with God. I was in that instrumental part of his life, that instrumental part that he was able to transition from where he was to where he ended up being spiritually. And I don't know even though I'm a pastor, I can't say I know everything about heaven and everything that happens with our loved ones and all that. But when you do life with people and you're able to get deep with them into their spiritual levels and talk, it does something to you because you feel like you're important in their life in such a way that it means something. So make a long story short and come off of this part of the topic. So it was probably another 6 months. I had a dream, and he was in my dream the first time I dreamed of him, because since he had just given his life to the Lord, he did have a lot of just regular baggage as being a human being. So it was always a question of, did he make it? Did he not make it? And I know sometimes we always have those thoughts. But I remember sitting in a room, and I could see him, and I could hear all my other siblings. I could hear you, Stephen. I heard my sister Kelly and my brother Jonathan. But I couldn't see any of you guys. He was the only person that I could see. And he turned and looked at us. He said, "It's the most beautiful city I've ever seen in my life. It's the most beautiful city I've ever seen in my life." And that just gave me like this, oh, man, he did make it. He did make it. And then what threw me for the loop is he said that, but he wasn't smiling. He said it, but he was shaking his head. And then my sister, and if you know Kelly, she's the one that she going to ask whatever's on her mind. She want to know. And she was like, "But why don't you look happy?" And he just shook his head. He said, I should have done this a long time ago. I should have done this a long time ago. And when I woke up from it, what I got is that he was saying, yeah, I made it. But if I knew what this would be like, I would have started that journey, that spiritual journey, a long time ago. I wouldn't have waited so long. And so as an aspiration, it makes me want to double down and get people locked into their spiritual life. And I ask myself this question: what if all this church stuff is an absolute lie? What if it's totally false? What if it isn't what we think it is? What if we just die? When we die, we don't go anywhere. It's nothing. The way I look at it is, but just in case there is something on the other side of our journey, our spiritual journey, that is greater than this earth, it's worth it to try. It's worth it to try to lead people to the Lord. On this podcast, I try not to be too preachy, so I'm trying not to have real preachy terms. But at the end of the day, I'm a pastor, so if it is something on the other side, if there is a heaven, if there is a life to come that's greater than this, it's worth trying to be there with people and give them everything they can so that they're locked in spiritually to have life on the other side. So that's whenever I think about grief, that's the aspiration is, man, see if I can, in people's waking moments, can I be the type of person that makes people think about the afterlife, just in case it is everything we've read about, preached about, and that much more, which I believe it is. But I don't think I lose anything by living this life the best way I can now, because if I just died, then man, I lived a great life. I changed people's lives. I did everything I could. But if it is what we think it is, it's worth us giving our all in people's lives right now. What do you
That's
think about
powerful.
that?
That's powerful, man. I put in the chat that we might end up crying on here because it's just, man, grief is a monster at times.
Yeah, let me throw this comment
But
up
it's
that
all of.
let me throw this
Go
comment up
ahead.
that Krista said. Who would want to miss out just in case? And I think she said in a few words what I'm trying to say. Just in case, who would want to miss out? And when it comes
Man,
to aspirationally, if our greatest loved ones are over there, who would want to miss out on that? And why not us? And I'm going to go back to getting on my preachy soapbox. Why don't we stop trying to put everybody in hell and try to figure out how to get people into heaven? We got a lot of preachers like, oh, you going to hell, you going to hell, everybody going to hell. I get so tired of all these people who feel like they're excited. They act like we want it to be some exclusive country club. Like we want it private. We only want like 10 people. I don't want 10 people in heaven. I want billions of people there. So let's stop trying to get everybody to go to hell and flip it and see, can we aspire to use all this pain we've had on this earth to get everybody to a place where there'll be no pain?
yeah, that's good. Whew. Um, so many things pop in my head from that. I love that story. I never heard you tell it. Um, and I think about my cousin, who that one was is very tragic and is a very tough one to deal with. But one thing I'm very happy about is that me and my cousin were kind of at odds uh, for probably six or no, it had to be more than that. It was almost a year and a half, I think. We just not talking. He was displeased with me. I was displeased with him.
Yeah, and I was
But
and I was caught in the middle of it.
but I'm happy we were able to get it right, and we our relationship had restored, which made it even more uh, power. I mean, sad, but also just so much more grateful that we didn't let something like that go be our last. How do you say that? We didn't end on those terms,
Yeah.
right? And that's probably a good takeaway for folks too. Is you definitely don't want to end on terms with people that's just negative when you really don't have to. When you think of it in the big scheme of things, you really don't have to end things that way. There is a way to I'm not going to say get over it, but to get through it with people, get through whatever you're dealing with them in such a way that it's like, okay, I know if something were to happen, just in case, look, it's no, we're not gonna, I'm not gonna have hate in my heart. And jumping to what you were just referring to about heaven and afterlife and what that looks like, it certainly is a compelling reason for the sake of grief. One, to have that hope, and secondarily, a compelling reason to live out a spiritual journey in such a way that you have something to hope for when it's all over. Because if you really can sit with that idea that, okay, there is something after life, the conversation about whether or not you believe in God and whether or not you believe in all the things, it really it really matters little about what you like about church, or especially if you're black and you are upset about the traditional black experience, or even if you're white and you're upset with that, or if you're Asian, or if you are some other descent, Indian descent, or anything like that. Like, you, those things matter little. Like, if you really think about it personally, if this is more about uh, what happens after all of this. Um, and yeah, it's a compelling reason for getting it right with people, not letting the sun go down in your wrath, and not, you know, not living in such a way where you haven't even thought about what it means to live after death.
Yeah, and I'm gonna turn a corner in something that's I think it's kind of weird, but in some ways I'm kind of weird, but this is a thought that crosses my mind. I may let's say it's an internet troll or something. Somebody's popping off at me. Sometimes this crosses my mind. Would I cry at their funeral? In other words, do I know them enough for if they were gone, they would really pain me? You know, I don't want to see anybody die. But then my point is, I've learned not to give a whole lot of emotion and attention to things and people that really don't matter to me so much. They're not my group. They're not my people. So I wasn't a fan of Donald Trump. Not that I wanted to see him to die, but if he did die, I'd be like, oh, that's sad, but I wouldn't shed a tear. So I'm not going to be so up in arms about every little thing that he does because it doesn't really, he's not in my inner circle, so to speak. And it may be a weird way of framing it, but my point is sometimes we're giving too much of our waking attention to things that don't matter when there are things that really do matter. There are people that really matter. And while you're fussing on Facebook and debating about this, you could be going to someone that you haven't talked to in years that really matters to you. And if they were gone and you didn't get a chance to fix it, you would be hurt. So why don't you spend more time focusing on that instead of focusing on what the Kardashians are doing at any given moment? And I'm not saying that we got to be super deep. So those things are important to us. But you have to start thinking about who are those people in my life that they are my people. These are like if something happened to them, it would, all these things we're talking about, it would hit me. So you have to invest now into those people and stop investing so much time into people and things that really don't matter.
Yeah, and you said something a few weeks ago, I think, about, you know, I don't know if you said it exactly like this, but it's basically like where you're putting your energy in terms of, I think it's in terms of people in general, like where are we putting our energy? And if you don't get it right, then, oh, this is what you said. It's like people are upset at the funeral with themselves because they didn't get it right, because they're so putting their energy on things that don't matter. Um, and well, prioritizing almost things that don't matter, or being distracted. yeah, by things that don't matter, and consequently, then being the things that do matter, those relationships that need to be restored, that brother you need to call, that sister you need to call, that relationship you need to get right, just for getting it right sake, gets deprioritized, while, like you said, our attention is drawn to something else, the basketball game or the latest pop-up, news cycle. And it's quite it does our life a disservice, because if we are to get into that situation that you described, where you're at the funeral and now you going wild because you have you have no sense of closure, because there's so many things left open. So I totally agree with that, and I hope people are taking away something good from this.
Yeah, you know what? This is something that I heard early on in ministry from a funeral director. As pastors, we always have to deal with not just family, but funeral director. And it's something that's proven to be true, not 100% of the time. It's because things are always different. But he said a lot of times the person who is acting out the most at the funeral is someone who has the most guilt. And what they mean, that everybody processes grief differently. But I've been in funerals where you have people who they take all the attention in the moment. They make everything about them. Nothing is right. My mama wouldn't want it this way. My mama. And when you sometimes get the hold of the family, it's because they didn't have a good relationship with mama. They didn't love mama as much as they could there. And so that funeral becomes their moment. And a lot of times the people who have actually really been in the parent's life or the loved one's life consistently, everybody's going through, but there's a different way of they don't handle it in a way where all the tension needs to be on me, because they're not approaching it with guilt. Now, once again, this is not a 100% fail-proof thing. It was just something that he pointed out to me, and as I've gone through ministry, I have seen that. And I've even had family members tell me, it was like, be careful of so-and-so. She'll try to take over the service, and it's just because she really didn't have a good relationship with mom like we did. But
wow,
and it's weird. So you have to give people their flowers while they're living. You give them, and you're only one person. So I'm not saying that you can't give everybody all of yourself all the time. And that's one thing I struggle with, because I'm in 100 different places in my mind, in my life, all at the same time. But I've learned to, in the moment I'm with that person, give them what I can in that moment. That's our moment, and give what I can. So I want to encourage people to do that in the moments that you have with people. Give what you can in that moment. If it's just a good, hearty laugh, that's important, because when grief comes, those laughs that you long forget, you forgot what you're laughing about, you'll remember. There are certain things that I say to myself that my cousin used to say to me, and it makes me bust out laughing. And it was always a joke, and I wouldn't necessarily laugh at it at the time because he was cracking on me. But now it makes me laugh because I'm remembering that moment, and that moment means something now that he's no longer with us. So, and I preached on it last Sunday about living in the moment. But moments are so important, and you can't get momentum without maximizing the moment. So the older I get, the more I cherish moments. Just to throw this out there, right now, after I leave here, I got to go home, change, and go to work. But other than that, I'm not thinking about it. I'm not thinking about, right now, I'm in the moment of this podcast. I'm in the moment of who we're talking to, who we're going to reach. Sure, I got to do something later, but I can think about that later. Right now, this is the moment that I'm in, and I need to maximize this moment. And when you start treating people that way, then it'll help you when grief comes because you won't have that same guilt.
Man, there's so much I want to say from that. This is a work tip. I learned this from the guy I work with now, and my friend and business partner. Um, do it. Well, I've learned it in a lot of places, but I've probably seen it exhibited best in him, and it's do it now. Whatever you're trying to get done, procrastination really it becomes a habit. And if you do things now in the moment, whether that's work, if I'm in a work moment, let's do it now. Or whether I'm spending time with my child, okay, let me do that now. Um, Understanding how to do it now and not put things off is probably the single most important work tip I could throw out there for anyone who needs that work tip. So do it now, and maximizing the moments. I hope people are taking that as a key, a wisdom key, because when you do that, when you live in a way where you're maximizing the moments, you learn how to protect your energy, because to Andre's point, you don't have to, if you're always not in the moment, then you're really not getting things done. You're really somewhere else, so you're not really giving your full self. And I struggle with that because I'm very much brains all over the place a lot of times, and always thinking about what could be. I'm very iterative and inspirational and ideation, um, but I'm working on and consistently improving the fact of being in the moment. And so, yeah, I agree with you there. There's something else I wanted to say. It's slipping my mind right now, but uh, I wanted to ask you, Andre, around aspiration and how you deal with loss and grief. And I want to get back to sort of the broader topics, not just death, but let's say you lost an opportunity, you lost a sale, you lost a client, you didn't win the house that you were going after, or you didn't get approved for the loan. You lost there. How I I struggle with looking at people that don't have the same aspiration or drive as me, and saying like, what are you doing? What are you doing with your life, your time? Like what's important to you? Um and especially as it relates to grief, I struggle with, if that was a loss, deal with it, move on, and like keep going. But I also recognize that I'm wired a little bit differently. So I guess, how do you, if people don't have that sixth level of grief, acceptance, aspiration, if they're always kind of in the acceptance and, the sadness, I kind of, I want to advise them to move into aspiration, but I'm not sure everybody's wired like that. And I guess, how would you advise, or how would you advise even me to deal with people like that, that aren't so much, oh, I'm going to go leave a legacy. Oh, I'm going to go try to create a scholarship fund for this person. Maybe that's not the way they want to approach it. How would you approach them? And I guess, how would you approach me around that?
That's something that I'm working through in generally, because like I talked about last week, that in my mind, people don't come back. You can't bring people back. So I'm already thinking forward. And I brought up that when our uncle got murdered, and how there's a lot centered around making sure the person was brought to justice. But none of that really resonated with me, because the guy going to prison wasn't going to bring my uncle back. So I've had to get outside of myself, so to speak, when it comes to being a pastor. And so I think one way to answer this question is, you can't approach everybody like they are you. So in your own way you handle things, you handle it what works for you. But when you're trying to walk someone else through, you have to walk them through on the level that they're on, and the pace that they're on. I'll give you a good example that when you go visit someone who lives in a place you're unfamiliar with, and you have your car. Let's say you drove to their house, and you guys are all going out somewhere, and they have to lead you somewhere. They have to know you don't know the city like they do. So they can't drive like they normally would drive. They have to think specifically about the fact that they're trying to lead you to that destination. And and even within that example, okay, maybe I won't take the freeway because that'll be confusing, or I won't go this way because this way always has construction. I'm not going to do what I normally would do because my major goal is to lead them to the place I want us all to arrive at. So you have to be willing to go outside of yourself to do that. But conversely, you will find out that there are some people who don't want to follow you. So you can only lead those who want to follow you. So there are some people who are stuck in grief, and that's unfortunate. And you may be called to try to help them along, but they may not want to leave. They may not want to go. This may be where they want to stay. And that's when you have to ask yourself, will trying to help them, will that derail who I am and where I'm going? Will I lose all my ambition and aspiration if I stay with them where they are? And that's a choice and a chance you have to take. And that's why you have to realize, who are your people? Who are you actually called to? Because there are some people you have to crawl in grief with them because they are your people. And there are some people you can't crawl in grief with them because they're not your people, and they'll pull you down. And if the shoe was on the other foot, they wouldn't crawl in that hole with you. And a lot of mistakes that we make is we give people a level that they're not willing to give to us. We'll change our whole life to help someone who wouldn't.
Lift a finger.
Yeah, I wanted to say it the way my aunt would say it, but that would be inappropriate. But they wouldn't do a certain thing to you if you were on fire. They wouldn't do a certain thing to you. So, so uh, you have to. I don't know why I keep coming back to this topic, but you have to know your tribe. You got to know your people, and you have to know the people within your people. I look at Jesus with his 12 disciples. He functioned with them all differently. He had an inner circle within the circle. He had one that was a total betrayer and ended up being the devil, but he functioned and flowed with them all differently. So you got to know who your people are, and those people you're called to do life with, you try to be on their pace. But there comes a certain time where if they're going to get to that next level, they're going to have to kick up the pace. So sometimes you have to have hard conversations with people. And when you have people in your life that you can't be honest with, they're not really your people. If I can't really tell you, hey, your breath stink, you need to do something about it. Here's some gum. If I don't want to do that to you, you're not really my people. Like, hey, you got some spinach in your teeth. There are people that that you would never say that to. You'd let them have spinach in their teeth all day long, not because you don't like them, but it's awkward because they're not your people. But when you have your tribe, there are certain conversations that you're able to have with them, and it's some give and take. What would you say about that?
No, I like that. I think it helps me know even more that I have to be cautious when I pick up vibes that this person's not at the aspiration level that I'm at. So while they might listen to me, they won't necessarily learn from me. They may also not be ready yet. I like what Chris is saying. Remember that everyone moves through and around those stages differently. Absolutely. So, and I think that's important to note from both of your perspectives. I've started to learn that as I've gotten older, because as I was at an earlier time in life, it I guess it shocked me that not everyone wanted to jump levels. Not everyone wanted to learn about investing or learn about how to make money or how to maximize this or that. Not everyone's interested in that. Some people want to sit back and chill, and they enjoy kicking the bobos and being entertained by other people's lives. But that's not me. That's not my tribe. I'm not interested in being around a bunch of broke people. I'm okay with if you don't have money and if you're poor. I'm cool with being cool with you, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time with you because that's not where my aspirations are at. That's not how, and even I would feel like it would be a disrespect to the things that I'm grieving, the people I'm trying to leave a legacy for me to continue to have broke conversations. And I don't mean like you just don't have money at this moment. I mean like you literally you don't believe you can achieve. You've sunken into that state of you really haven't seen more for yourself, either because you haven't been exposed to it, or you clearly at this level or at this stage at this time in this season don't want more for yourself. And so everything you say reminds me that I need to be, especially myself, knowing myself, I have to be very particular about how I, in dealing with people and even dealing with people close to me or even dealing with myself, I know I have aspirations, but if I'm uh, advising someone on how to deal with grief or how to deal with loss, whether it's a job, if I lose a job opportunity, I have confidence to believe I can go get another job. I can get a better job. I can go create a job and not get a job, but that's how I think. And that's what I go after. That's how I try to get around other people that think that way. I try to be pushed and pressed, but what you said to me reminds me that not everyone thinks like that. Not everyone can handle that level of advice. And even if people will listen to it, you can give people advice and you'll notice from what they do whether or not they really took the advice.
Boy, that sounds like the life of a pastor right there. But one
Well,
thing that I've learned is this, and I think this will help you, and even those who are still tuned in with us. When people invite themselves into your space based on what they see you doing, and they want to aspire to be like you, then you give them everything. You let them know, look, this is the way it's got to be. But when you're called to step down into someone else's space, you come in a different mindset. So sometimes sometimes you are attracted to a grieving person, or attracted to a person that's lost, or attracted to a person that's broke in order to build them up. If you are drawn to them, then you need to take them at their pace. But if they try to come in your space, they're attracted to you. They've got to stay at your pace. So there's a lot of both of those things. But there are some people who will see you and be intimidated and will never try to go there. But if you have someone that steps up, especially if they say, "I want to be mentored by you. I like where you're going. I want," then hey, you got to do what we do. But on the flip side, if you feel called to go grab someone, that's different. You take them at the pace that's more a little bit of where you are and where they are, and you kind of mix it. You kind of One thing I've learned, I try to remind myself if I'm going after someone, like the scripture says that Jesus would leave the 99 and go after the one. If I'm going after someone, I try to remember where was I at that stage. If someone is in the middle of depression because of their own sin, I've been there. If I go after them, I try to be there with them. But if you come to me and say, "Hey, I want a marriage like yours," and then all you do is cheat on your wife, I'm like, "Well, you don't want a marriage like mine because you're not doing what I'm doing."
right.
So it's different if I'm going to rescuing someone who's coming off the heels of an affair versus someone who says they want to be where I'm at and they're not putting in the effort and the work. And when you challenge people, you'll find out they put up or shut up. And then, but there are those cases where you're reaching. So it's finding who you're called to and who's called to you, I think.
I agree. And I just, for those listening and for those that can learn from that sixth stage, I would say the aspirational stage of how you deal with loss. Um, and hopefully it even helps you. Again, I'm thinking more of not necessarily the loss of life, but the loss of other things, and knowing that grief is the proper response to loss. Like you should grieve. You lose an opportunity, you trying to buy a rental property and you lose it. Take some time and grieve, but know that anyone who wants to aspire to say, well, all right, let me get back out there, uh, hopefully that feeds people that already have aspirations, that already seek to do more than what they've seen.
I would also say to add a line a lot of people have used, but I know Jay-Z uses it too. But some losses are just lessons. So if you can look at the lesson in the loss or the lesson in the grief, and then I like to say it's the lessons that become the blessings. So when it's first packaged to you, it's packaged to you as a loss. But when you unwrap it and unpack it, and that's why we have to unwrap and unpack grief oftentimes, sometimes you find it's a lesson in the loss. And then that lesson becomes the blessing. So you have to be willing to unpack it when it's in its loss form, when it's at its place where it's just a loss, and see if there's a lesson in it, if there's something you can learn and grow from. And then oftentimes it's those lessons that become the blessings.
I think that's great, man. I know we're running out of time, and there's another topic I wanted to bring up. We don't have time to get to, but just talking about grief in general and being able to talk with people, like you said, that can listen to you, that you can unload on and connect with. I hope everyone really tries to find people they can connect with like that. And one of the things I hope we do with this podcast is sort of build community. And if you're struggling with grief, if you know people that are struggling with grief, I hope you share this with them, share this talk with them, so they can find some strategies and some ways to deal with that. Um, but also, I wanted to give you guys this number that you can reach out to. It's a number that I've started where you can reach out to me directly if you've got anything you want to deal with in terms of grief. But there's other things we're going to be looking at. Not, one topic Andre and I will probably get to is goal setting at some point, because sometimes you need to set a goal to come out of grief and come out better, and really kind of step into that aspirational stage of how do I take this loss and say I'm going to live in a way that honors them from now on, and that's going to be the way I deal with that grief. So I'm gonna give you this number real quick, and I'll put it in the chat as well. It's 765-234-3633. So if you're dealing with grief, if you know somebody who is, or if you've got some goals that you're trying to set and reach and get to, and you're like, I'm not quite getting to them this year, I need to get to this goal, I want you to reach out to that number, and I'm going to try to help you work through some of that. Again, it's 765-234-3633.
Go ahead and put it in the chat, and then I'll throw it up on the screen as we get ready to leave. Or maybe Krista's already put it in there.
Thanks, Krista.
Yeah. So that's it, 765-234-3633.
Yeah, and another thing I say in closing remarks is regurgitate these things if you feel led to. If any of this helped you, like it kind of helps me. One of the reasons we started this, Andre and I, is because we used to talk all the time, and he's always been a mentor to me. We've been friends as well, and we are friends, and so this discourse helps us. So we hope that it helps you, like it's helped us. And I would just encourage you to, regurgitate these conversations to your friends, your circles, and see if it helps those around you.
The old scriptural saying says, iron sharpens iron, and this is just what we would do because of the hectic schedule of our lives. Sometimes we couldn't talk all the time, but when we would talk, it would be an hour, 2 hours, just talking about things, going from subject to subject or digging in one topic. And just one day I was like, man, what if we just did that on the podcast? What if we talk like we normally talk and just let other people in our conversation? So that's what the Pop-Up podcast is letting you pop in on us while we pop up and just rap, have conversation. And many times it's in the conversation that we find wisdom that was there to push us to our next level.
It's in the conversation that you get comfort.
Oh, yeah. Preach.
Without preaching.
Well, we're at that 9:01 hour, so let us send you out with this music. We appreciate all those who are on with us. Once again, this is Andre Mitchell from Andre Mitchell Ministries, and this is Stephen Mitchell from Stephen Motivate, and we are brought to you by Diamond Shine. So you can go on to Amazon and you can look up Diamond Shine Products. That is our sponsor for this pop-up podcast. So we will be with you in another week. We're going to try to start off by doing every other week. So we'll see you again in May.